Hello, my name's Kelly and welcome to my channel. This is going to be my March wrap-up. I read 6 books in March, starting with Spy by Maz Evans. This is the story of a girl called Violet, or Vi, whose mother is a retired super spy and whose father is a retired supervillain. They are two people who should never have got married, so now they are divorcing. And while they are in the midst of squabbling over parenting styles, basically, it becomes beholden to Vi to save the world from the takeover of an evil overlord, which, well, as you can already tell, this book doesn't bother too much about plausibility. It is set in our world, but it's completely ridiculous and it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's full of humour, which I was kind of prepared for. I say prepared for because this author's style of delivering jokes can be quite relentless and exhausting for an adult reader, perhaps. I'm sure that children love it, but I've previously read book 1 in her Who Let the Gods Out series, which is a series about Greek gods, I think. I read Who Let the Gods Out and I really enjoyed that, and I do want to continue that series, although I'm not sure I'll continue this series. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars and I still recommend it, especially to children who I think will love it. But for me, there was some... Again, this story isn't concerned with being plausible, but I kind of felt like sometimes the humour and the almost exaggerated ridiculousness of the implausibility just felt a little bit like a cop-out sometimes, and yeah, sometimes the humour wasn't enough to compensate for weaknesses and holes in the plot for me as an adult reader. Again, children are going to love it. I will say though that this was not well edited. It needed it needed one more proofread because there were quite a lot of mistakes that were really distracting me while I was reading this. And I read the author's note at the back of the book, which says that she wrote this during the pandemic lockdowns, and that means that this has been written, edited, produced in a very short space of time, and it shows in the editing. It feels like Chicken House churned this out, and if that author's note is true, which why wouldn't it be, then that's why it reads that way. Anyway, Spy, License to Chill by Maz Evans, book 1 in a new series. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. That was my first book of March. The second book I read is called The Strangeworlds Travel Agency by L.D. Lapinski. This is about a 12-year-old girl called Flick Hudson. Flick has just moved to a new home with her very distracted parents and her attention-hogging baby brother. And while she's off exploring her new home by herself, she stumbles across a mysterious building which turns out to house the Strangeworlds Travel Agency, which is currently run by a teenager called Jonathan. Jonathan's father has previously gone missing, as in a few months before the start of this story, his father has gone missing. The Strangeworlds Travel Agency is full of suitcases because it's a travel agency that explores the multiverse, and the multiverse can be reached through schisms or gaps in our world, which are contained within various different suitcases. So the agency is full of suitcases, and Flick asks lots of questions, and it turns out that she has certain abilities that means that she is a candidate to join the secret Strangeworlds Society, which she does, and when she does, she basically agrees to help Jonathan try to figure out what happened to his father while his father was off exploring the multiverse. While they're doing that, however, they discover a magical threat to the multiverse, which they have to try and do something about. I won't say any more than that. I gave this is also a 3 out of 5 star read. I also don't know whether I'll continue with this series. Nothing against it. I just wasn't that taken. I wasn't taken by the characters, and I'm a reader that really needs to be bowled over by the characters. Flick, although I quite appreciated the exploration of, the older siblings' plight, basically, when they've got a younger sibling that comes into the picture and suddenly they've got extra responsibilities and extra household chores, and yet they get far less attention from the parents. I quite enjoyed that acknowledgement in the plot, but I didn't like Flick very much as a character. I didn't find her all that sympathetic to a particular decision that Jonathan takes later in the book. And also Jonathan, although I quite liked Jonathan, he wasn't believable in any way to me as a teenager. He was a middle-aged man through and through. So I still think this is a solid book. 3 out of 5 stars isn't a bad rating. I'm just not sure I'll continue with it. I also found the plot a little bit ambling until quite close to the end. But I love the premise, so if it sounds good to you, check it out. The third book I read in March was Evie and the Animals by Matt Haig. This is about a girl called Evie who can talk to animals, which is an ability that led to her mother's death in the jungle many years ago, and is why her father is extremely overprotective of Evie. He insists that Evie not use her ability, not act on her ability, and not cause her ability to be found out by other people, lest she go the same way as her mother, basically. So Evie's living a bit of a half-life, not able to be her true self, until the events of this book. Although I will say that she doesn't really get to act on them at the beginning of this book. I started reading it more than a year ago and I stopped because I got bored. I think the beginning is a bit slow. It picks up though the more animals you see Evie interact with, because I think that's the strength of this book. Matt Haig has managed to give very distinct voices to different animals. So, you know, the dog's voice is very different from the snake's voice or the big cat's voice at the zoo. I can't remember whether it was a lion or a tiger, so I'm fudging it and saying big cat. Matt Haig has, I think, done the best job of any author who has given voice to animals in their books. I don't always find talking animals that enjoyable to read because I don't find they're always done that well and they just talk like regular humans, but the animals in this, I think, seem like the animals that they are in tone. So I really enjoyed that, and even though I only, again, 3 out of 5 stars is not a bad rating, even though I only gave this book 3 out of 5 stars, unlike the first 2 I've showed you, I do plan on reading the sequel if there is one, because I would like to explore more, and I did really enjoy those animal voices. The fourth book I read is yet another middle grade. It's called The Night Bus Hero by Onjali Q. Rauf, but I don't want to talk too much about it because I've heard some things about the author since I bought this book that I need to explore further before I potentially promote her books. I will say that this book is quite interesting in that it's from the perspective of a bully. It's a bully called Hector who goes from playing a prank on a homeless man to helping to redeem that homeless man when he is accused of a series of crimes in the neighbourhood. The fourth and only non-middle grade book that I read in March is a self-help non-fiction book by James Clear. This is Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. So this is about habit building, specifically how stacking and repeating various small habits can create very big changes, which I completely agree with. And if you don't agree with it before you go in, I think that this is a very convincing argument to the case. And it's also a very readable book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I do highly recommend it, even if I do think that the message is a little bit laboured as you go on, which is a little bit exacerbated by the fact that it opens with an anecdote about British cycling and the rise of British cycling using basically atomic habits that was so interesting to me and so effective at conveying the message of the entire book that you probably could have just had that chapter and that would have been as effective as the entire book. But I do recommend the entire book, hence why I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The information is worth reading, it's just not necessarily worth the author repeating quite as often as he does. Nevertheless, why does it sound like I'm being negative about all these books even though none of them were bad? Nevertheless, this is a good book, I do recommend, and I probably will reread it one day in the future. So I've saved the best for last because the 6th and final book that I read in March was my first 5-star read of the entire year, and it's also the sequel to another 5-star read that was my best book, my best read by far last year. It is Shipwreck Island by Struan Murray, and it has cemented Struan Murray as my favourite middle grade author. I think he's magnificent and I'm really excited to see what he does going forward. And part of me wants him to quit his job and just focus on writing so that I can have more of his books. But then I'm like, no, is that best for the books? Because sometimes people need to step away and people need time. People need to cultivate lives outside of the writing, otherwise the writing suffers. But I'm like, no, I want more books. Basically, I've given it too much thought because that's how excited I am by this author. Since this is a sequel, I can't tell you too much about this one specifically, other than the fact that it introduces a character called Molworth, who is pure gold, and I hope he appears in book 3, and if not, then he needs a spin-off because Molworth is life. So I won't talk about this one, I'll put it down for now, and I'll pick up last year's champion, which is Orphans of the Tide, and tell you about this one. This is the story of a child inventor called, an eccentric child inventor. Struan Murray said that he was sort of inspired by Leonardo da Vinci, and I'm obsessed with Leonardo da Vinci, which further endears me towards Struan Murray, to be honest. Ellie is an eccentric child inventor who lives on an island that is the last landmass on Earth after it has been flooded by a mysterious disaster. One day a whale washes up on the island and out of the whale crawls a boy. The islanders are all convinced, apart from Ellie, that he is the vessel for an evil entity known as the Enemy, and they set about trying to kill him. Ellie, on the other hand, disagrees and sets about trying to help him. You know when you read books that are so good they make you feel a bit empty afterwards? That's what these did to me. And even though the stories are nothing alike, I was reminded of the emptiness that I had when I finished Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, because they have the same what am I trying to say? Basically, they have the same high stakes and character depths that make the reader really anxious and completely unable to stop reading. And I'm just in awe of it, because you know how if you're a writer, you read certain books and they come from a familiar place, this sort of universal consciousness, this storytelling zeitgeist that we're all plugged into. So we're all roughly capable of telling a lot of the same stories, even if it would be different or better or worse. We could tell similar stories. I couldn't tell this story. Like, this story has come out of such a unique amalgamation of the author's unique experiences that I couldn't tell his story, and I'm so glad that he told his story. I'm sorry, I'm gushing a lot, but Ellie and Seth, as the boy in the whale comes to be called, are wonderful, and oh my god, these stories are so deep. You need to read them. That's all I'm going to say, because I'm not adding anything. I'm not adding anything good to the discussion at this point. I'm just gushing. Do you know, you know when you try to think about how to convey how much you love something, the way I found to explain it to the editorial team that I work with was, if I was having a zombie buffet, I want Struan Murray's brain to be at my zombie buffet for me to eat. And now I'm actually thinking what course I would eat his brain in, because the first course might be the one that you're most eager to eat, or the last course might be the one that you're saving for last because you want to savor it. I don't know in what order I would eat my zombie buffet brains. I'm gonna stop here before I freak anyone out. I hope you all had a lovely reading month in March and proceed to have an even better one in April. I want to read 10 books in April, probably middle grade again, because that's what I work with for my job, so I need to make sure that I'm reading lots of it. Anyway, take care, be well, bye for now.